I'm Pam, and I would like to welcome you to the Live Authentically show. My team and I help other people step into their authentic realities via a number of different modalities. This show is obviously one of them. We also have a like minded group of people committed to spiritual growth and transformation in our Facebook group, and you can find us at liveauthentically.today/FB. And I'm also super pumped that I recently released my debut book. It's called SOAR, SOAR, and it's on Amazon. And it is an experiential spiritual journey through my divorce process and shows how I partnered with the universe to create my new reality. So I am super pumped that on my show with me today, I have Heather Kent. Hey, Heather.
Hey,
How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Yeah, closing out and a great week here, and I'm super excited to chat with you this morning. So, Heather is a psychotherapist and she is a #1 best-selling Amazon author. And I'm super excited to hear about all of the work that you do. I know that you help people heal from abusive relationships. So I know that this is a super important work that you're doing in the world. And I think, regardless of who we are, I think at one point we've either witnessed or been in a
Mm,
somewhat abusive relationship. And I think it can be somewhat eye-opening when we hear what actually qualifies as abuse. I love to talk about how abuse is actually defined, because I think some people, and again I say this with no judgment, but just get used to certain patterns and behaviors and learn and really just put up with things and tolerate things that technically are categorized as abuse. So would love to talk about that. But before we dive into everything that you do, all the amazing work that you're doing in the world, I start all of my shows off with the same question. And that question is, how do you live authentically every day?
how do I live authentically every day? Well, for me, I actually start every morning with some affirmations, positive affirmations to start my day. And for me, that is super helpful because it just sets my intention, it sets my mood, it helps to shift my mindset into having a positive day, which is something that I used to yearn for back when I was in abusive relationships. And so one of the things that I've adopted to live authentically as me is to start my day with affirmations. And I also love to do exercise in the morning, just to kind of get the blood flowing and the juices pumping and my brain
Yeah.
woken up a little bit more. And for me, it's also really important to speak how I feel and to speak my truth. And so part of my growth process from when I, again, was in an abusive relationship, I felt like I didn't have a voice and
Okay.
I wasn't able to speak up. I wasn't able to, say what I thought because I was afraid of, the repercussions of that. And
Okay.
so one of the ways in which I live authentically now is to make sure that whenever I do have something to say, or there is something bothering me, or there is something on my mind, that I
Mhm.
am going to say something about that. And I'm not going to be silent.
I love that. Such a beautiful answer. Would love to kind of rewind and, ask you to share whatever you'd like to share. I realize it's very personal, it's very sensitive, these personal journeys, particularly when we're talking about abusive relationships. But would love to have you just kind of color in your journey, how you went from that place of fear. Because I think, the spiritual journey really is, regardless of what reality we're living, it really is a journey out of fear and into faith. And, while I wasn't in an abusive relationship, I was in a relationship that, was no longer in my highest good. It had run its course.
Mm-hmm.
It was well beyond its expiration date, but I was still living in fear because I was in fear of the unknown, fear of stepping into a new reality. So I would love to hear whatever you're willing to share about your journey from fear into faith.
Absolutely. And it really is a journey. And the thing about abusive relationships, so maybe I'll start a little bit by answering one of your earlier questions about what is abuse and what does that look like? Because
Sure.
I think part of what happens in the fear place is that you gradually grow into this situation and you don't really realize it's happening necessarily.
Okay.
Because and what I tell clients that I work with is that, if the abusive person that we have in our lives was as horrible to us at the very beginning as they were at the end, there's no way we would have booked a second date. There's no way you would have pursued this relationship. You would have run for the hills and that would have been the end of it. But because in the beginning, things seem really wonderful, things often seem fantastic. this person is connected, this person is into you, they are over the top engaged, they are, asking you all these questions, they future fake with you and tell you all these things that you are going to, they're planning to do with you in the future. And you really, because you are showing up as your genuine self, you assume that the other person is too. That's
Right.
not, that's not necessarily the case. And in abusive relationships, of course, they don't, show their true colors right away because, of course, no one would ever want to be with them if they were awful at the beginning. And so, what happens is slowly over time, the, the what we thought we were getting into kind of degrades into something that is much more difficult to deal with and certainly very challenging emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. And so my experience was just everything was great at the beginning. He
Mhm.
was fantastic, charismatic, super fun, very, kind of chasing me to spend time. And then once it became clear that I was, engaged and I was, kind of, I felt a sense of obligation and interest to him, and
Mhm.
then things started to shift. And so it becomes not often very obvious. Sometimes it's just, inconsistencies or, it being inconsiderate, and that doesn't seem like a big deal at the beginning. But
Mhm.
slowly over time, these things compound, right? And so you have not just, physical violence, which is what most societal norms use as the benchmark for abuse to classify, which is really dangerous because physical abuse is only one part of it. And when there's physical abuse, there is also always other types of abuse. And so that's just one manifestation of it. And so the psychological and emotional abuse, financial abuse, these are all things that are happening all the time in relationships. So
Mhm.
when you have someone who is gaslighting you, who is blaming you, who refuses to take responsibility for, their actions or their parts of things, tells you that you're overreacting, you're too sensitive, tells you that you're crazy, you're making things up that never happened, I never said. So that's all part of gaslighting. And
Okay.
just shifting blame
Mhm.
off of the abusive person onto you. And
Mhm.
so that is a big thing that I went through absolutely all the time. And then there are other things that happen too, sometimes where there's this like degradation, making fun of you, mocking behaviors. Even sarcasm can be used, in an abusive way when it really isn't funny, but it's, used to kind of put you down and mock you in front of other people sometimes. And then there's also, isolation and ignoring. This is like emotional, kind of like neglect over time.
Mhm.
So neglect is another form of abuse as well. And then when someone else is in full control of the finances and doesn't want you to work and doesn't want you to, have access to bank accounts and doesn't want you, this is financial abuse as well.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so these are kind of the different ways that abusive relationships can operate. And so some of the bigger red flags to kind of look out for because it isn't always obvious. And the interesting thing about certain types of abusive people, like narcissistic personality people, they show up in the world very different than the reality of what it is like to live with them. And so everyone else on the outside thinks that they're fantastic, thinks that they're wonderful. I don't know how many times I heard, "Oh, Heather, you're so lucky to be married to him. Oh my goodness, I can't believe you got so lucky. He's your husband. I can't believe that he's your husband." And I wanted to say to them, "Yeah, he's super great," until you go home with him and
Mhm.
then everything changes behind the scenes. And so this is what I think a lot of people go through and suffer through. And so it feels very isolating and lonely because the people around you can't understand why you're unhappy or why things aren't okay because
Mhm.
what they see is a complete facade of what's actually going on.
Okay. And was there a period of time in your relationship where you felt trapped? You felt like I'm stuck here and you didn't know how to get out?
Absolutely. So in my situation, we were together a total of 8 years. And after 4.5 years, I actually left. We were engaged at that point, but I could no longer tolerate the the constant abuse. And in his case, he had a pretty significant pornography addiction. He had cheated on me several times with different women. And so I couldn't tolerate it anymore. So I gave back the ring and I said, that's it, I'm done. You have serious problems, I feel, and I can't live this way. And
Mhm.
of course, he could not tolerate that I was rejecting him. And so because he was a narcissistic personality, so his ego couldn't handle it. So he was doing whatever he could to get me.
Okay.
So for 6 months, I didn't pay attention to it. And then at Christmas time, he showed up to my family's house
Oh,
and
unannounced, just showed up.
unannounced, and asked to come in and put on this lovely performance in front of my entire family. So
Oh,
again, how sorry he was, how he's been to counseling, how he's changed. He gave me this very meaningful, thoughtful gift, gave this big speech, and drew not only me, but also drew my family back in because, of course, they were quite upset about what had happened. And it was really important that my family was on side in his mind, uh,
mhm.
because that would come into play later. So I got sucked back in. We were engaged again within a month, um, and things did seem better. But there were still some, like I said, that emotional abusive control of behavior that was there.
Mhm.
And his mom died very suddenly, which was awful. There was a moment where I was like, well, I definitely can never leave now, uh,
Yeah.
because that would make me an awful person, right? And so we got married and we were together for several years. But I remember every day I used to stay at work longer than I had to because I didn't want to go home.
Oh, wow.
And I would come home and I would park in the driveway. And before I went in the house, I would just kind of like take a breath and steel myself because I didn't know what I was going to be getting when I walked in the door. Was it
Mhm.
going to be getting happy and funny him, or was it going to be getting the abusive, angry, lashing out, throwing, yelling things person?
Oh, wow.
Um,
How
and
terrifying.
yeah, and because I had been so conditioned to believe over time, as I said, these things it's very insidious type of abuse.
Mhm.
So you can't really see it. I had been conditioned to believe over time that, everything was my fault and
Oh,
that, I'm the cause for all of his, you know, mood swings and his, displeasure. And so it really felt like I was so trapped and so alone, because my family didn't know what was going on because I couldn't handle them being in a fight. Like I couldn't handle the conflict. And
yeah.
so I just tried to grin and bear it for as long as I could. Um, and then, yeah, he started to threaten to leave me if I wouldn't have children with him according to his timeline. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, like I had this like gun to my head basically. And he was like, if we don't do this right now, then the relationship's over. So he would threaten the relationship quite often. And that is a really common kind of manipulation tactic, again, used in abusive situations,
Mhm.
to make you afraid. And they also kind of would say things like, you're never gonna find anyone else who, loves you like I do. No one's gonna want to put up with you. Nobody's going to, get you the way that I get you, and you're so lucky to be with me, etc. And so you believe that you you can't do better and that you couldn't survive without that person.
Mhm. And
And
where did that stem from? That, like, them feeling the need to tell you all of these things. I mean, is that just a hallmark sign of or characteristic or symptom of narcissists that their ego just completely
yeah,
overtakes them?
yeah, it's all about power and control.
Mhm.
And it is like their ego just that's the fragile part. Like so internally, which they would never admit to themselves or the world, they're very insecure people, highly insecure, and
Mhm.
they have a lot of internal self-loathing and self-doubt. But to kind of deflect that, they create this false image, this grandiose kind of outward image. And they have to be in control and they have to have power over the situation because if they don't, then there's a possibility that their facade will crack, right? And like people will find out who they really are. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that's it's just it seems like a very very complex. profile, if you will.
Yeah.
The narcissist ever be changed? I mean, or is it once a narcissist, always a narcissist? Or can a narcissist do some really deep soul work if they want to and change?
It's a really good question. I get this question a lot. And yes, they can. Yes, they can change. However, it's a big, however, big caveat. Because their egos can't tolerate any kind of criticism, and they cannot ever acknowledge the possibility that they could be wrong or flawed in some way, because again, that goes against that this false self that they've created.
Sure.
When they can't admit that they have a problem most often. You're the problem. You're the problem. They're not the problem. You're too sensitive. You're too crazy. You're too, overreactive. You're blowing things out of proportion, whatever. They can never take any ownership for their behavior. Oh, I only did that because you made me do that. I only behaved this way because of what you said. If you hadn't said this, I would never have done that. So, like, there's just never any accepting of responsibility. And so it is very rare, not to say it doesn't happen, but it's very rare that a narcissistic personality will say, yeah, I have a problem, and then agree to go to a professional to get a diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
of a personality disorder, and then agree and commit to long-term therapy, because it is a long-term road. Like,
Sure.
there was an article in January's version of Psychology Today about this. Can narcissists, change?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is yes. And there's like a 12-step process in that therapy kind of journey.
Okay.
And they don't even learn how to have empathy for other people until step 8, because
Wow.
the whole rest of it is just ego problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the hallmark of narcissism versus other abusive and like personality disorder kind of trait is the lack of empathy, the complete disregard and inability to consider how other people are feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
how that just doesn't even play into their decision-making process, like ever.
Okay.
Their goals are very self-serving, self-centered.
Mm-hmm.
And the ends always justify the means.
Okay. And where
Um,
does this stem from? I mean, where is it believed that narcissism originates? Is it from, is it, kind of an inherited condition? Is it childhood patterning?
so there's a few different, I mean, there's no one kind of, this is always how it happens. And there's still kind of lots of research being done around this.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a few different kind of typical things that you could look out for. So if the person has a family history of personality disorder, mental illness, so like quite often a narcissist will have had a narcissistic parent. And so that the narcissist typically tends to be the golden child, which is like the chosen one, the one that can do no wrong in the narcissistic parent's eyes. And so they will be groomed and kind of trained and sort of led to believe that they're special and important and more important than everybody else, and that they don't have to bow to anyone else's whim, and they can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
And so they learn to become narcissistic from the parent
Okay.
in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of cases it can develop from having significant childhood trauma. So if you have if you're in an abusive situation as a child, it can have implications for narcissism later in life. If you are, for example, like a survivor and a refugee, you watch your parents get killed, and you're, just fending for yourself
Mm-hmm.
since you're 10 years old,
Yeah.
it becomes all about you. And
Okay.
so that can, this is an example of how that might develop.
Sure.
Um, and so there's kind of different contexts. Childhood trauma is a really common one, and
Mm-hmm.
having a narcissistic parent is another really big one. But it's not really kind of cut and dry necessarily. But there's usually some kind of family history of mental illness, or like abandonment in childhood, or just no one to help guide and teach those sort of morals and ethics principles to when they're young.
Okay. I see. So, what was, in your personal experience, what was your breaking point? What was the straw that broke the camel's back where you said, I just can't do this one more day? And how did you get out?
So interestingly, it was the lowest, one of the lowest points in my life, actually. So um, I had been dealing with all of this threatening behavior, threatening to leave. You have to have kids with me now. Something inside me, I wasn't a parent expert at that point, but something told me, I probably shouldn't have kids with someone who's like threatening me and forcing me into it. That's probably not a good context to have a child. So there was something in my gut that was just like, no, this is not a good idea. Not that I wouldn't have enjoyed being, having children, just that did not seem like a healthy way to do it.
Yeah.
So he tried to get my family on side, to convince me that I should do this. And so they were badgering me too. What's wrong with you? Why don't you want to have kids? Like, you guys have been together for so long, blah, blah, blah. Because of course they thought everything was fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was, so then again, like I felt very alone and like no one really understood what was happening.
Yeah.
And so I was venting to a friend one evening. I was allowed to go to a friend's house, and I was talking about what was happening, and her brother was also there. And obviously, the story was quite captivating because it was pretty awful, the things that were happening. And then I went into the kitchen to get some food or something, and the brother came in and he was like, I can't believe this is happening to you. Like, this person is so terrible. And then he kissed me, and I was so super surprised and shocked. And so I had this like, tryst kiss moment with this person. And I was like, oh dear God, this is awful because he's going to find out and that's going to be terrible for me. And so I was so terrified that he was going to find out. I told him about because I just couldn't handle the stress of like what was going to be the wrath.
Yeah.
And so of course, yeah, it was terrible. And then he called my family behind my back when I was at work one day and told them that I had had a psychiatric break, that I had lost my mind, that I had become an insomniac, that I was sleeping with a bunch of different men, and that he had photographic evidence, and that I really needed psychiatric help and needed to be committed into a mental hospital.
Oh my goodness.
I had no idea that he did that. So, later that day, my parents were all visiting. They were away, staying with my sister, and which is far away. And so, and my sister was quite pregnant at the time, so she wasn't allowed to travel, like get on a plane. And so they all thought that, I had lost my mind because, how would they think that he would be making something like that up, right? And so they were beside themselves, and my sister was losing her mind and thinking that she needed to come because I was in this terrible state and like this is awful and it was the end of the world. But then my family, they were so angry at me because they thought I had done all these terrible things to my husband. They wouldn't talk to me. I didn't know why. And so I thought it was because of the kiss, right? Yeah. My dad gets on the phone, he starts yelling. He's like, you have to be a better wife, and what is wrong with you? And you need to treat him with more respect, and et cetera, et cetera. And I, this whole time, thought this was about the kiss. So I already felt terrible about it and really guilty, but now I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm just the worst person on the planet, obviously. My mom would not get on the phone. She would not speak to me for several days, and neither would my sister. She was too upset. So finally, and the whole time, he never ever told me what he said to them. But he was just like, see, what you did was inappropriate and whatever. And, I'm on, I'm right and you're wrong, and your family's all on my side. And that's another big tactic too, is that they will often try to use people that are close to you in their manipulation tactics.
Okay.
To get them to establish control and to make sure that you don't leave or whatever it is that they're trying to establish. So this was my breaking point. When my family wouldn't speak to me, I was completely and utterly alone. So he, of course, did the counseling, which I did. And then I suggested that we go to couples counseling, which was a bad idea because he tried to shame me again to the therapist. Mm-hmm. Luckily, she was highly intelligent and she could see through what was happening. Mm-hmm. And after only a couple of sessions, she took me aside and she said, you have to get out of this relationship.
I just got chills. Just got
Yeah,
chills. Wow.
yeah. She said, this is not healthy for you, and
Yeah.
we need to find a different. And that was like the big smack across the face for me, like the therapist was telling me this. I had friends, see his behavior and they were like really upset about things that he had done, abandoning me downtown in a snowstorm with no way to get home and no money and no coat, yelling at me and, throwing things, ripping clothing. And they'd seen some of these things. And so they were concerned about it. But then when the therapist was the one that said, you have to leave. So that was very helpful, empowering, and also terrifying all at the same time in
Of
the moment.
course. Yeah. Of course. So then what happened next? Did you have to communicate to him that
Yeah.
you were going to leave the marriage, and how did he react?
I had to go home. I packed a bag kind of in secret. And then I had everything kind of ready in my car. And I had arranged to go and stay at a friend's place for a couple of nights.
Hmm.
Um, and then I told him, the therapist, because he was dying to know what we talked about. He couldn't handle, again, that not knowing the control piece.
Okay.
So I said, actually, it was the therapist told me that we're not in a healthy relationship and that we need to end it. And so I'm ending it and I'm leaving today. Like in 10 minutes.
And what was his reaction?
He was totally shocked. He was like, no, that doesn't make sense. If you can't leave, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? So we started again with the kind of the fear mongering kind of
Mhm.
comments around like, how are you going to survive? You can't, survive without me. And then when that didn't work, he started on, how is he going to survive without me? Which is probably more accurate. Um, and so I was just like, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. I've lost everything at this point, including my family. Because
Mhm.
again, they still didn't know that like, I didn't know what they had been told. And I said, so I have to leave because I can't do this anymore. And then I got in the car and I left. But I actually can't remember. It's interesting. My brain has like protected me, I guess, from that. I don't remember the physical act of leaving the house,
Mhm.
but I do remember arriving to my friend's house, like being in the car and driving. But I can't recall the actual what happened, like when I left the house. There's a
Mhm.
big kind of memory gap there for whatever reason. And so I did finally get my parents on the phone. It was actually my sister first, and then she made some comment that made no sense to me, and I said, "What?"
Mhm.
And then she came out with this story that they had been told, and I was completely shocked. I could not believe these horrible things that not only that he came up with and told them, but that they had been tortured but with thinking about these things this whole time. And he never ever called them back after that time when he
Mhm.
made this announcement. He never ever communicated with them again. He never, said that he was wrong or that, he overreacted or it
Mhm.
wasn't as serious as he thought it was, or he didn't do anything. He just let them believe that I had, become this nymphomaniac, and who went off the deep end.
Oh my goodness.
And he let them think that indefinitely. And so my poor mom, this 12 years later, my poor mother still hasn't forgiven herself for kind of refusing to talk to me in that time and kind of turning her back, she feels, on me. And I have no ill will about that at all because she was manipulated.
Yeah. And they can
And
be so convincing, just so
yeah,
incredibly convincing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just
So
leaves
that's,
such destruction in their wake. I mean, not just with, your relationship, but affecting the lives of so many other people.
yeah, yeah, it was really, really, really dramatic and much more drama than I ever would have wanted to have in my life.
Sure. So how did you go about what did your healing journey look like? How did you go about rebuilding yourself from, what was really your rock bottom?
Yeah, actually, for me, I I needed to do some real just soul healing, inner soul healing. I was so completely broken at this point. Um, I I was this hollow shell, and I felt like a hollow shell. Like it really felt like that of who I used to be. And anyone who knew me, and especially my family, like I was bubbly and gregarious and charismatic, and always joking and laughing, and
Mm-hmm.
I was very chatty and social. But I had become very reserved and quiet and kind of afraid and like unsure of myself, and like had lots of confidence. I didn't have any self-worth, of course, at the end. And so I actually decided I needed to kind of totally leave my life and do something completely different for a period of time. So this volunteer opportunity through Rotary International came along because I was a teacher at that time. And so I moved to the Dominican Republic for 4 months and completed a volunteer service grant,
Oh,
and did some education work in impoverished sugarcane villages, which is mostly inhabited by Haitians who come over to cut the sugar from
oh,
Haiti. Yeah. So I lived in a town with, I was the only white person anywhere, and nobody spoke any English or anything. And so I learned Spanish. I moved there. I lived with some families, local families at first,
mm-hmm.
and this was my healing. These
Okay.
people, these complete strangers on different part of the world who don't speak my language embraced me into their home and into their life and into their family immediately, and just showered me with so much unconditional, like no strings attached love and just affection. And it was so shocking to my victim, so incredibly shocking. And it was that time with these people that really started to fill my bucket back up again with good things. And so it restored my faith in humanity. It restored my faith in being able to trust people. And so it's interesting that, living with strangers and meeting people that have nothing to do with your life at all is what brought me back to myself.
Yeah, wow, beautiful. And what did
Mhm.
you learn about yourself during that period of healing?
That I'm a lot stronger than I gave myself credit for in that time, and that I do not have to tolerate. And I was doing therapy work. I had an amazing therapist that I saw before I left, and then I would phone her when I was there. And so, she helped me to understand that what I had been through was narcissistic abuse. Like I
Mhm.
learned what gaslighting was, and I learned what the manipulation tactics were, and I
Right.
learned, like, because a big thing that I had to work on for a long time was the not feeling guilty or responsible for other people's problems or happiness, and not feeling like I had to fix everything all the time,
Mhm.
um, apologizing for everything all the time,
Okay.
because I really carried a lot of guilt all the time for everyone, and apologizing for existing, apologizing for taking up space,
Mhm.
and so that was a big thing that I had to work through, was that I am worthy of taking up space, and that it's okay to take up space. In fact, I deserve to take up some space. I also have a voice. I used to use it all the time,
Mhm.
and I can use it again, and I'm never going to allow someone to take that away from me again.
Mhm.
And so I just, it's interesting, and I talk about this with my clients. I would never wish trauma on anyone, but the growth opportunity that comes from experiencing trauma is just so profound, because you have this sort of depth of experience and reflectiveness and inner growth work that you do
Mhm.
to do that healing work. And I realized that I did not have to make myself small
Mhm.
anymore, and I could do the things that I wanted to do. And I started, at first it was a little bit just exciting, like, screw you, I'm going to play the piano again. And like, screw you, I'm going to go and do this again, because he wouldn't allow me to do any of these things that I used to love. And so, yeah, and then it just kind of grew into, okay, now that I have myself back, I need to really understand that boundaries are going to be very important. And
Hmm.
that was a huge learning piece for me too. And so I had allowed my boundaries to become eroded over time.
Okay.
As I used to have them. I tolerated nothing. I should tolerate anything at all from people before. Like if I was dating someone and they were, the slightest bit rude or mean or whatever, I'm like, okay, see you later. Like I'm done. But they're so, so good at what they do. And that's cycle of abuse.
Hmm.
Be hooked in. And a lot of you don't realize you're stuck in this cycle of abuse when you're in it, right? It's all so confusing. And so these are all things that I learned about kind of outside of it afterwards. And then I understood that I was also a part of the problem because I was enabling the behavior to continue. I
Okay.
enabled him to treat me this way. I allowed that to happen. I did not put down, I did not stand up. I did not have boundaries. And so part of that was me and being that perverse feminine where I just kept giving and giving and giving and giving until there was nothing left to give.
Hmm.
Then, which then kind of promoted the perverse masculine on his side to be even more domineering, even more overpowering, even more controlling, versus the divine feminine that stands up, that has a voice, that says no, that, you know, understands the limitations, puts in healthy boundaries so that we can have a balanced life.
So, is your experience with trauma, your whole spirit experience with trauma, and the subsequent recovery and healing, is that what gave rise to the work that you're doing today?
Absolutely. So it was interesting. So when I when I returned back to Canada from living away, I actually ended up staying there for almost a couple of years in the end. And I came back right after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. And the teaching, and I could see, and I taught in a very, how shall I put this, racially charged school with lots of conflict and violence.
Hmm.
Um, and so the students that came to school were such victims of intense trauma themselves
Hmm.
that, and a lot of them themselves were already wrapped up in gang violence and, prostitution rings and recruiting prostitutes to get sent to Niagara Falls, and like all of these things, drug deals were happening, outside of my classroom.
Hmm.
These things were going on all the time at school. And so these kids are coming in, their parents are in jail, or however their cousin got shot last week. This is their reality. Um, and we're expecting them to sit down and do math for 2 hours.
Hmm.
I haven't eaten in a week. So this became intolerable for me because I was just like, I could see their trauma, and then their terrible behavior at school was because no one was listening to them, right? And I'm like, well, I'm not equipped. I don't know how to help these people, right? I can't. And I'm forced into this box of making you try to do work, which is obviously not helpful to you in the situation that you're in. So it was my students at first that really kind of promoted me to go back to school to do my master's in psychology. So I did that. And then I worked a little while in child and youth mental health. I worked a lot with children who were kind of victims of trauma, whether it was from abusive parents or other situations that happened. That was a very interesting experience because it allowed me to see how children can be impacted by abusive parents, right? And adults behaving badly. And then I went into private practice, and it was in my private practice where this really showed up. These women just showed up in my practice over and over and over again, different women with the same problem in these
Okay.
relationships that were highly abusive. They felt stuck, they felt trapped, they were terrified, they didn't feel safe, and they didn't know what to do. They couldn't even, some of them didn't even realize what was happening necessarily initially.
Hmm.
Um, and when I saw how prevalent this was, just in, this town where I was working, I thought, oh my gosh, this is a much bigger problem than I ever imagined. Like I thought it was just me kind of thing, right? But I realized that this is much bigger. And so it was my clients actually that that really motivated me and inspired me to write books because I felt like this could maybe help so many more people who are out there that I don't know about, who might be looking for help. Because I know when I was going through it, I could have certainly benefited from, something like this or working with someone who understood my experience or, having a book that was like really all about that.
Sure.
So that's what motivated me to do that.
Wow, beautiful. Beautiful. So I love, your story is just so powerful because you've not only been able to move through your healing and heal yourself, but you've actually transmuted your pain into healing humanity. It's really a gift to humanity, the work that you're doing. And it's obviously clear that there's a need there because, you show up and it's like moths to a flame, right? You show up and all of a sudden all of these women come out of the woodwork who are in such desperate need of your healing. So I think
Yeah.
it's just so beautiful what happens when we just trust the process and just show up and keep putting one foot in front of the other and have an open heart and an open mind and a commitment to healing and a commitment to doing our soul work, which isn't easy. It requires a lot of heavy lifting,
Yeah.
but there is, we can move through it. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And if we just keep moving, keep putting one foot in front of the other, regardless of what our reality is, we will get there and we will emerge, stronger and more evolved than we've ever been and that we've ever realized that we could be.
Oh, it's so true. It's funny. If you had have asked me 12 years ago that I would be doing this work and wrote 2 books and, working on trauma with women who are survivors of abusive relationships, I would have been like, there's no way I do that. That's not something I do. No. So it's really neat to see the progression of life. And I'm very grateful for my experience because if I hadn't have gone through that, it wouldn't have led me to where I am now and to all those things. It wouldn't have led me to live in another country. It wouldn't have led me to this humanitarian work that I still love doing. It wouldn't have led me to pursuing a whole new career, which I absolutely love. And this work that I do with these women is just, it fills me with so much just joy to see them become empowered over their time. Mm-hmm.
So beautiful. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for so courageously sharing your story today and for all of the work that you're doing in the world to help heal others. If people would like to get in touch with you directly, what is the best way for them to do that?
So they can go to my website. My website is very easy. It's my name. It's heatherjkent.com. And there's contact forms there, but there's actually a little button at the top and it says contact me, or you can book a consultation with me. And you can email me. All that's directly from my website. You could also download my 2 books for free from my website as well. So all of those things are available, and it's heatherjkent.com. So trying to keep it really easy for people.
Yes, amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you being here today and for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom and for all of the amazing healing work that you're doing in the world. And
Thank
thank
you so much for having me. I'm so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be here with you and speak to you today.
Thank you. It's been an honor to have you here. And to all of our viewers and listeners, as you know by now, I believe that time is a choice. And I'm grateful that you've carved time out of your day to be here to listen to everything that Heather has had to share with us. So thank you, everyone, for being here and have a wonderful day.